Is your podcast experiencing Podfade? Do you know what Podfade is? Well, in this episode, I'm going to explain a couple of things and why maybe your podcast is part of that 75% that are no longer in production. Let's get into it. Okay, so you know when a show gradually stops releasing new episodes and eventually falls off the map altogether? That's podfading. And it's the reason many podcasters don't get past their 7th episode without experiencing a decrease in motivation. Urban Dictionary defines podfade as when a podcast suddenly stops releasing new content without a final show or announcement. Thousands of new podcasters came on the scene last week alone. Although the podcast movement is gaining traction, there is a large percentage of podcasters who stopped their show early on. In 2019, roughly 27,000 podcasts stopped releasing new episodes. According to a 2018 statistic by Amplify Media, Blueberry CEO Todd Cochran says 75% of podcasts are no longer in production. That statistic used RSS feeds to determine active versus inactive shows. Now, there are many different reasons on why your show or any show could be experiencing podfade. Maybe you ran out of things to talk about. Maybe you thought you were so interested in a topic that you thought, hey, I could do 1,000 episodes on this. But it turns out you can only do 5 or 6. And that's okay because, you know, it's funny. The more research you do on a topic, the more you might come to realize, hey, I don't really want to talk about that anymore. Like I said, there are a multitude of reasons why a podcast can be experiencing podfade. One other example is that if you run a show with a co-host and suddenly maybe that co-host isn't interested anymore, or maybe that person just shows up to record and doesn't do anything else, doesn't do any of the social media promotions or editing, or just isn't involved in any part of production, just literally shows up, records his or her part, and goes home. And that's fine, because some shows, maybe that works. Maybe, you know, one person does the behind the scenes and the other person is the talent. Who knows? It depends on podcast to podcast where you feel you're most valuable in your talents to what you can provide to the show. And there's nothing wrong with that. But again, you know, when it comes down to it, podfade is a real thing. A majority of podcasters experience it way before their 7th episode. Maybe they might do 1, 2, or 3 episodes and then say, hey, this isn't for me. But you never know until you try. And it's okay to experience podfade, because in the end, if you weren't that interested in the topic of your show and you didn't want to create the podcast for it, then why should you continue to do it? That doesn't mean you don't like podcasting. Okay, so pick another topic. Do a general discussion show. Do something else that you're interested in where you know that you can talk about that for hours and churn out as many episodes as you possibly can. So right now I'm reading through Buzzsprout's blog on what they define as podfade and the 10 best steps to prevent podfade from the start. So let's go over it. So number 1 is set realistic expectations. It's easy to get excited about starting a new podcast and hard work to keep it going once that excitement fades. Setting expectations that are achievable can go a long way towards staying motivated. Number 2, stick to a loose outline. Starting a podcast with little to no structure seems fun for those who like to shoot from the hip, but it can quickly lead to rambling, disorganization, and a subpar listening experience. There's no need for a formal outline unless you want to make one. A short, bullet-pointed list is all you need to get started. And number 3 is something that I've already talked about. Choose the right topic. You don't have to be an expert on your show's subject matter, but what you lack in knowledge should be made up for with enough real curiosity and genuine enthusiasm to keep your show going strong. Make sure you have enough interest in your show's topic to consistently find new, good content and discuss it on a regular basis. Number 4 is start as a series or a seasonal show. Maybe you don't want your show to be a serial show. That's fine. But there are benefits to a new podcaster starting out with a limited set of episodes. By starting out as a seasonal show or a series, listeners expect your show to have an end. If you get to the end of your show and decide to stop, it won't be considered podfade. The end was expected. If you decide to keep releasing new podcast episodes, it will be a pleasant surprise to your listeners. And there's no rule that says you have to stay a serial podcast if you started out that way. So don't think this locks you into any particular format. Keep your setup simple. Buzzsprout covers this more extensively in the How to Start a Podcast guide. Your recording setup should be easy to work with. You don't have to spend a fortune on buying equipment. If you head on over to VodSquad.Live, there's a page there called Gear. Okay, I have listed out and broken down the basic equipment you need to create and produce your own podcast / vodcast on the cheap. I have a basic plan, and then I have an advanced plan where it breaks down every piece of equipment you're going to need, as well as some hosting plans for your show, as far as where you host your RSS feed, if you have web hosting, if you want a professional website. So head on over to VodSquad.Live and check out the page called Gear. Buzzsprout's tip number 6 is avoid editing burnout. Quality editing is important, but it doesn't have to take up a lot of your time. New software makes it possible to edit well without getting overwhelmed by the process. If you have the budget, outsourcing your show's editing to podcast producers is also an option. Now, I don't know if I agree with this per se, in the sense where I don't think you should outsource the editing part of your podcast. Because number one, unless you're a celebrity and you're Joe Rogan, you're getting Joe Rogan kind of numbers, I think you should be hands-on with your show, know the ins and outs, how to produce it, how to make it, how to edit it, how to lay down music tracks, how to do intros, how to do outros, how to interview. You need to know how to do everything that your show is involved with and know it as a pro. So number 7 is choose a sustainable format. Start your show with a format you're confident you can sustain long-term. If finding a new person to interview every episode feels daunting, create a schedule that incorporates guest interviews every other week, once a month, or maybe not at all. A demanding, unsustainable format is the death of many podcasts. Record for your listeners. Just like bloggers shouldn't write for Google when they're blogging so they rank high in search results, podcasters shouldn't spend time thinking about how to please Apple Podcasts so they can become the next new and noteworthy show. Try not to focus on Apple or your show's stats. Spend the majority of your energy creating quality content, and you'll greatly increase chances of success in the long term. So this is huge, because it's like record for your listeners. This goes back to the other topic we were talking about, is the quality of your show and editing, because when you edit and you're creating your episode, every episode, you should be thinking of the audience in the back of your mind. You want to say, all right, is the content I'm putting out quality content? Is everything all leveled out? Is my voice going to blow out their eardrums? That kind of thing. You have to keep your listeners in mind as you make new content for your podcast. Establish short-term goals from the beginning. A little planning goes a long way in podcasting. Know what you want to ultimately accomplish with your podcast, but don't get bogged down by long-term goals in the beginning. Focus on short, achievable goals for the first 8 weeks of your show. How many episodes do you want to have released by the end of the 8 weeks? What other goals do you hope to achieve by then? If any of you listening are running your own podcast, you know already that consistency is key. So how many episodes do you want to have released by the end of 8 weeks? You should have 8 episodes, unless you do more than 1 episode a week. But you should be doing at least one episode a week for 8 weeks. So it's good to have goals. It's good to say, okay, in about 8 weeks, I want to be here and I want to have all this completed and done. 10, have some shows pre-recorded to act as a buffer. Set aside time to record 2 to 3 extra shows before you launch. Don't release these. Keep them in your back pocket for days when life happens and you need a break. If you record 2 to 3 extra episodes, you'll have enough content to keep you going if or when you hit a dry spell. By preparing for a dry spell ahead of time, you won't have to panic when it comes. You can relax, air a pre-recorded episode or 2, and take time to think up new ideas. So this is a great idea because you're creating new content and you're just putting it in the bank. Okay, you're saving it for later because I know I've experienced it where I'm like, oh, I don't know what to talk about. This week, I don't know what I'm going to do. So with this, you don't have that problem. That's a great idea to keep some episodes in the bank to release at a later date. When you can't think of an episode idea, you already have it. Or let's say something happens and pulls you away from your studio for like a week or 2. You have those in the bank and you can just release them. That's a great idea. I hope you guys don't mind going over the Buzzsprout list kind of tips to prevent Podfade from the start. I got the email for the blog post and I read it and I'm like, this would be a great idea for a show to talk about Podfade because it is important to talk about that sometimes shows go away. Sometimes it turns out you weren't that interested to begin with, and that's okay. But don't give up on podcasting. All right, everybody, that's it for me today. Thank you for joining me. If you head on over to VodSquad.Live, check out the website. There's a couple of things on there that I think every podcaster should have. I have an episode planning sheet and a vodcasting equipment guide, all free for you. So go head on over there and download it. I also have that list of gear that I mentioned earlier on in the episode, every piece of gear that I think every caster should have. And of course, I have my courses that you guys should really sign up for. I teach you how to go live and produce a successful live show on StreamYard. I'll teach you how to create everything from the graphics to the intro to promoting on social media. So head on over to VodSquad.Live and check all of that out. Also in January, starting January 1st, I am launching a subscription-based platform called vodtv. Okay, so if you are a current vodcaster, if you are creating video content, you are going to want to be on VodTV. I am giving all vodcasters a chance to be on television. VodTV is going to be a dedicated Roku, Fire TV stick, and Apple TV channel dedicated to vodcasting. So I'm looking to launch that January 1st, but I need a little help. So head on over to gofundme.com/VodTV and show some support. All right, everybody. All the links to everything I mentioned here today are in the show notes, so go and check them out. I'll see you next time.